Alright, welcome back to the Honored Madman with another sort of impromptu video. This one wasn't in the lineup that I mentioned, but since I live in a fiery wasteland, I figured why not do one about fire? And boy, is there a lot of different types of fire in Elden Ring. All of them are generally considered bad when it comes to the Erd Tree, but there's a fire of every kind of variety. There's the Frenzied Flame, the Ghost Flame, the Ancestral Spirits soundtrack, the Blackflame, there's like Malekith Black Flames. Anyway, there's a lot of flames, and I'm going to try to go over every single different kind of flame in this video. One thing I wanted to say before I get into the meat and potatoes of it all is that it's interesting that the Greater Will is represented by the Erd Tree, a tree, and all these opposing outer gods and forces are represented by fire, which, burns trees down. They're basically complete opposites, is how they're depicted. And several of these different types of fire are capable of burning and hurting the Erd Tree, so it makes sense that the Greater Will and the Golden Order would sort of prohibit fire use and kind of be in opposition of all of these different types of fire. Some of them even have whole religions devoted to them. And prophets of the Two Fingers who witnessed the flame, either the flame of frenzy or the flame of ruin in their visions of their faith ending in fire, were pretty much treated with scorn and disdain. They were pretty much treated like pieces of shit, They forced him to wear blindfolds, basically, if you can see the future, why do you need to see it all? That type of shit. But anyway, let's get into the video. So first off, there's regular fire, which was prohibited to those who serve the Erd Tree, which kind of makes sense because they don't want the Erd Tree to get burned or any of those people to turn traitor and have access to fire. But this sort of changed when the Wars of the Shattering got too desperate and they started allowing all these guardians and other members who serve the Erd Tree to use fire as a weapon. A good example would be the Royal Perfumers, who use several fire-based perfume attacks. But regular fire is also used in several low-level fire-based incantations. But these seem to channel the power of the Fell God, at least in some small form, whether they know it or not. Or I could be wrong on that. Could just channel regular fire, like a campfire or something. Anyway, next up we have the famous Black Flame. Now, like regular fire, this bad boy returns from previous titles. Namely Dark Souls 3, where there's a whole boss called Blackflame Freed, and there was a cool onyx sword that you could ignite with Black Flame, and there was of course a couple Black Flame pyromancies. But the Black Flame is back, this time with brand new lore. It is an incantation in this game, which is basically the miracles of Elden Ring, as opposed to how it was in the previous games where it was a part of pyromancy, it was a whole separate school of magic and all that. I'm glad they basically streamlined that a little bit and threw them under the whole umbrella of incantations. Anyway, this is the main armament of the Godskin Apostles and Godskin Nobles, who are said to have been bred by the Gloam-Eyed Queen or the Dusk-Eyed Queen, whichever you prefer. The Black Flame itself was said to be the Godskin Apostles' armor from within, and they used it to kill several gods and then, skin them and make whole outfits out of them. The Godskins themselves appear to be worshipped by the inhabitants of the Dominula Windmill Village. I believe they're called Celebrants. But they have cool weapons and appear to be some kind of A24 reference. The Dusk-Eyed Queen herself, very little is known about her. It's said she was an Empyrean who served the Two Fingers or was chosen by the Two Fingers. So perhaps she was America's competition back in the day? It's tough to say, but the god-killing powers of the Black Flame were sealed away when Malekith defeated the Godskin Apostles and Marika sealed away Destined Death, which obviously greatly reduced the Black Flame's usefulness. It's still a pretty useful set of spells in my opinion though. Its power was supposedly seductive enough for it to win over at least a couple of the Flame Monks to turn them into Black Flame Monks. And it's described as weighty, which I guess in game translates to the fact that it does lingering damage on the people you use it on, which is a pretty unique effect. And overall, the Godskins seem like a pretty cool bunch. I mean, they killed the gods and took Wrath of the Gods as a trophy, which I thought was funny. But anyway, moving on. The Flame of Ruin, or also called the Flame of the Fell God, basically the flames of a one-eyed fell god that lives in every single fire giant, or at least in game it just lives in one of them, and possibly it used to live in the trolls, which is why they run around with a fucking box fan in their chest, because they basically severed their connection to their former god. But you can get a good look at this god's face if you take a look at the fire giant's chest. It's sort of like a tiki man with one eye. It sort of reminded me of the Hinox from the old school Legend of Zelda games, like the Oracle of Seasons or the Link to the Past. since to me at least the new ones just sort of look like traditional Cyclopses. The fire itself is located at the Forge of Giants, and in its current form is just nothing but embers basically, but it's still there when Melanin needs to steal its power. It starts roaring real good. Well, these embers were tended by the last fire giant, who after all of them were defeated and genocided by America, was basically cursed to eternally tend the flames after good old America realized she couldn't kill the fell god, or eradicate the fire completely. So her solution, like to many things, was to just steal it away and hope to forget about it. Of course, in the long run this paid off, so maybe this was a calculated decision. It's tough to say. When it comes to America, she's one of the ones whose motives are a little unclear to me. It's also described as seductive in nature because it basically charmed this entire order of guardians that were charged with watching over it into turning them into worshippers and monks in the form of the fire monks and fire prelates. The transition from warden to worshipper was said to have happened slowly over many generations, of course, but it did happen, and it is pretty impressive. What's not impressive, though, is that they let the big secret of the fell god still being alive be stolen by some either defector or criminal or just a regular thief, and then that thief was then captured by most likely the Academy of Rea Lucaria or the Carrion royal family, which both would be in some kind of an opposition to the flame. In my opinion, I mean, they opposed the Golden Order. Why wouldn't they oppose this random group of fucking monks that's waging war on their countryside, just carving a fiery path through the land? Anyway, moving on to the Flame of Frenzy. Now, this ending, in my opinion, has the coolest cutscene. It turns you into the prisoner from Dead Cells. So this flame causes a madness buildup, which is sort of like a debuff that does damage and then builds up to do a massive amount of damage, which is similar to Frenzy of Bloodborne, which even has the same name. But lore-wise, it causes madness in all those who witness it and afflicts them with frenzy. They still are alive, but they run around, with fire in their eyes. Orange flames. And most of them look in agonizing pain. Their eyes themselves can be harvested in a few instances, not from them directly, but from, certain NPCs and certain dead bodies we find. They're called Shabriri grapes, and they're described as the eyeball of the affirm, oozing. And yellowed, the surface is sort of dry, not unlike a grape, so that's why they're called Shabriri grapes. And if you happen to have been embraced by the three fingers themselves, then you get a very specific fingerprint eyeball sort of thing that Vike had. I think it's sort of like the tarnished version of the Shabriri grape. But anyway, throughout history, many have tried to control the power of the frenzied flame, and all of these dumb bastards' attempts ended the same way. They all went mad after fighting a desperate internal battle with, themselves probably. Or like we saw in Ura's quest, he basically was fighting an internal battle because of what he was doing. He was hunting his fellow Tarnished, whether they were mad or serving another outer god, it didn't really matter. He was just wanting revenge, for them stealing Eleonora from him. But anyway, he hears worms, so maybe that's how they slowly drive these people or the Tarnished insane. But either way, all those who attempted to control it ended up going insane, only having a meager little incantation as proof of a small victory of controlling it. The first documented case of madness-inducing flames were in the empty eye sockets of a man named Shabriri, who is often considered the most reviled man in history. The three fingers themselves were summoned when an entire race of nomads, basically the merchants of the Great Caravan, were buried under the capital after being accused of a great crime against the Erd Tree or something. And after they discovered this fingerprint-covered stone that was in the tomb they were buried in, they started chanting, or perhaps playing the violin. Either way, whatever they did summoned the three fingers into existence, and it was all because they found that tomb shield that we can get in the game. Basically a big old chunk of stone that emits madness. It sort of reminds me of that Dunwich building back in Fallout, which was a Lovecraft reference, I believe. Now, several descriptions refer to the Flame of Frenzy incantations only working on Tarnished, but that's really just a gameplay thing, and that the build-up only works on other Tarnished characters or NPCs. I mean, you can one-shot Gideon, for example, with a charged Frenzied Burst if your faith's high enough. It doesn't even require it to be that high. But obviously other things can be afflicted with the madness, as we see in several locations, I believe, like Ailing Village, the Frenzied Flame Village, the Frenzied Flame Tower, which everybody calls the Eye of Sauron, which obviously, I mean, look at it, that's why And of course, Yellow Annex ruins, there's several peasants, knights, soldiers who are afflicted with frenzy. There's even rats and trolls who can be afflicted with the fire in their eyes. So this yellow flame does not discriminate. Next up, we have the mysterious ghost flame, which is said to be the... Hold on real quick. Alright, I'd be lying if I said that did not put me out of commission for a little bit. Anyway, the ghost flame. The cold flame of the death birds, who are sometimes depicted as sinister, though that could have to do with the fact that they're one of the things that the Erd Tree wanted to keep down and basically kind of wrote them out of existence because of what Marika did with the Destined Death. So this cold fire applies frostbite buildup, and it's pretty cool, if not a little vague and mysterious. So I have a whole video of this coming up, but to break it down, Marika sealed away Destined Death. Much later, her son Michaela ordered Castle Sol to cause an eclipse. The goal was to bring life to some soulless bones, which could be the mausoleum right outside. It could be referring to that, or it could be referring to Godwin, or just all the dead demigods in general, because Michaela was this genuinely caring guy from what I've heard about him. But what the eclipse does is it keeps Destined Death at bay, which allows the rather grim ritual involving the sacrificial acts that the Mausoleum Knights use to create more members. It's always willingly, as far as I can tell, but it's still pretty grim. They behead themselves, and it allows them to, through the ritual, it allows them to serve their dead masters eternally. And it also grants them abilities like teleportation, and it's a really cool thing. It's sort of like the Bloodhound step, but we don't ever really get a skill for it, so I just call it the Mausoleum step. Anyway, back on track. The cold ghost flame can be produced by burning the bones of the dead, which was the original rite of death before the Erd Tree came around. The lamppost of Helfin used this flame, and it was said that it was only glimpsed by those who had met their death in battle. And I believe those who didn't end up meeting their death in battle became Raincors, which were vengeful spirits of the dead. The Fallen Hawks, who were a group of slaves, a slave company who were ordered to explore the Eternal City, also discovered the ghost flame, though it was probably accidentally, as they were trapped under there and it forced them to burn the bodies of their dead to survive and stay warm. Only there wasn't no warmth to be had, because what they were actually creating was the fucking ghost flame. And it appears to have physically changed them into some type of small albino goblin type thing. Maybe they were demi-humans originally, but I don't think there's any mention of that because they're about the size for it. They do sort of look similar, but they're an unfortunate bunch of dudes, and they use spirit flame arrows, which are actually just arrows that have been lit with ghost flame because that's all they've got down there. They also use ghost flame torches to whack you over the head with. But the ghost flame itself is said to be the ancient power of the twin bird, which was the mother of all dead birds. It's often depicted as an evil, sinister kind of deity. But this twin bird was the vassal for an ancient outer god of death that we hear very little about. In-game, though, the ghost flame can be found in quite a few places. It's interestingly the torches that line the underground crypt underneath Stormville, which is where an ulcerated tree spirit is located and where Rajier acquired the death blight and all that. It's also found in all the torches and braziers or whatever, whatever they're called, brazzers. I don't know what they're fucking called, but the big torch things in the Eternal Cities. And I think it's usually found in crypts and near graveyards and where skeletons are at, usually those type of places. Also, the ghost flame appears to be what repairs the skeletons after you kill them, you know what I mean? You kill them the first time, and if you don't whack them again while they're rebuilding, they'll, get back up. It sort of looks like it's the ghost flame that sort of puts them back together. And a number of these skeletons also wield these Sun Realm shields, which I find interesting. I don't really know a lot about the Sun Realm, and I don't think there's a lot mentioned about it, but I find that interesting. The ones with gold armor also that we can't get. Anyway, moving on. Oh, also the Deathrite birds sort of spawn in a fucking giant ball of ghost flame, which looks pretty cool. It's easiest to see with the one in the consecrated snowfield by the artillery mausoleum. Alright, up next we've got Malekith's red and black flames. Now this might not be flames at all, but to me they look like flames. I call them the flames of destined death. When I first read the descriptions of the black flames' power being taken away when they sealed away destined death, I thought it implied that the red flames of Malekith were the god-killing and destined death part that was taken out of the black flame, but I'm probably wrong on that. I'm sure it didn't mean that as so literally. I think it's more than likely that it just meant that the powers of god-killing were sealed away when destined death was sealed away. But anyway, these red flames possess the destined death, that's for sure, and it also chunks away a big part of your overall health, which I thought was interesting. It's sort of like the Jailers from Dark Souls 3, except it's not so fucking, they can't just keep hitting you with it. But it's only used by a few enemies in the game, namely the Black Knife Assassins, who have it on their daggers. They basically were able to imbue their daggers with the Rune of Destined Death that was stolen from Malekith when Ranni, caused the Night of Black Knives. It is also, of course, used by Malekith himself, his Black Blade, the weapon and the incantation, his Black Blade Kindred, who are the unique gargoyles that are guarding his sanctum in Caelid, as well as the path in the Forbidden Lands. And finally, it's used by very specific groups of the pint-sized ambush enthusiasts, the Vulgar Militia, namely the group at the Forbidden Lands Pass where there's a Black Blood Kindred that's seemingly commanding them, and the secret path of the Hallig Tree where they could just be seeking out Deathroot to find for Malekith, or Geraint as his disguise is called. Next up we've got the small entry of Glintstone Fire, which apparently is achieved when a dragon eats enough sorcerers, because sorcerers, they have this primal glintstone inside of them. They wear glintstone crowns, battle mages wield glintstone clubs. Every single sorcerer uses some kind of a glintstone staff. There's a lot of glintstones. Next up we have the bright yellow goldish Holy Flame, which is different than the black and gold flame that I'll get to next. Holy Flame is only seen in a few instances. For example, the Dagger of Callings effect seems to be a sort of holy fire, as well as the ulcerated tree spirit's breath and eruption attacks. I only really call it holy fire because it does holy damage and it's all golden, so it looks sort of holy. Now the golden black flames are a bit different. They sort of look like the supposed wraiths that the Wraith Calling Bell summons and the Omen Barons summon, or that the omens themselves are able to spit right at you, except the Wraith Calling Bell's wraiths apparently do magic damage as opposed to holy, while the rest of the wraiths do holy damage. So maybe the wraiths have more in line with simply the other golden fires I mentioned. Now the black and gold flames themselves can only be found in very, very few places. The Mausoleum Knights appear to buff their swords or weapons in it, and the Eclipse Shodel, which has the unique skill Death Flare, is able to ignite itself in a similar manner to the Mausoleum Knights. This flame specifically does Deathblight buildup as well as overall damage, which makes sense given that the Mausoleum Knights themselves sort of exist within this state of undeath and in eternal servitude to their dead masters, which is pretty interesting. These dudes were definitely loyal, the Mausoleum Knights. You'd think that they'd have something to do with the Ghost Flame, given that they seem to revere the Deathbirds in some way, but I think that they're like a new spin on death overall. That's why that the flames themselves are holy and do Deathblight, because, the Rune of Death has been kept away for so long that death is slowly coming back to the Lands Between. Basically, that's stuff for another video. Anyway, moving on. The Golden Black Flames do Deathblight buildup. But next up we have the Blood Flame, or the Accursed Blood. It's an orangish flame that rises from expelled accursed blood. It can be empowered by an outer god known as the Formless Mother, who is basically causing havoc in a place known as the Land of Reeds, as well as, sort of behind the scenes in the Lands Between. Accursed blood itself appears to be the blood of omens, particularly regal ones like Mog, who had his blood upgraded by the Formless Mother, while his brother Morgott, who is also an omen, sealed away his omen blood inside his sword, kept at bay until the phase 2 of his boss fight when he sort of violently expels it all. Mog also appears to be able to grant bits of his power to worthy individuals like Okina, Eleonora, or what's his name, the war surgeon guy who's always saying maidenless, that guy. And lastly, we have the honorable mention Magma, which is the product of Mount Gelmir. Rykard turned the ancient hexes of the mountain into functional sorceries, which was said to be an ambition he shared with the serpents who also dwelled there, which he apparently had a lot in common with because he eventually fed himself to one. The magma is also used by magma worms who produce it. They're able to cough up a bunch of it. Magma worms themselves, of course, are created when an individual has eaten too many dragon hearts and has participated in too much dragon communion, to the point where they become this grotesque fucking monster. Even trolls are susceptible to this. But the fact that there's magma worms that live under Mount Gilmere, and the fact that magma itself is only found at Mount Gilmere and has this big association with the mountain itself, I think that the fate of these guys has something to do with the serpent god. Could be wrong, of course, but I think there has to be some sort of connection between the two because, you know, magma is only referenced in a few places within the game. Perhaps the serpent created the dragon communion as a sort of way to trick mortals into trying to become dragons. Anyway, though, that's really all I had to say about the different kinds of fire throughout the game. I mean, this video itself is already 10 minutes longer than I thought it would be, so that means I probably rambled a lot more than I, thought I would have. But I hope it was somewhat informative. I hope you learned something. I hope you liked the video. If you liked it, please like it. If you disliked it, that's alright too. You know, feel free to dislike it. If you like my videos in general, please consider subscribing. I'd really appreciate that. And, the Rinala video and the Mausoleum video, those are the big ones that I'm scripting out. So, I'm working a little extra harder on them. But I really like to do these sort of off-the-cuff videos. So, I'll see you guys next time, and have a good one. See ya.